Okay, here we go. Okay, welcome to the Transforming Assessment webinar series. This is probably the last one for the 2019 series. Today's session is by Chris Edwards from the Open University in the UK. And we're looking at the European Union-funded TeSLA project on multi-factor verification for online assessments. So Chris, would you like to begin, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Matthew, and everyone for inviting me to give this webinar. I should start by moving the slide, just prove I can do that. Yes, and just explaining my role in the project. It was a 3-year project, and it was a very, very big European project, and the Open University in the UK was one of the partner institutions that was primarily involved in piloting, but also in helping review. And the team there is Denise Whitelock, Professor Denise Whitelock, led him for the university, and I worked, and Alexandra or Ali Akada worked on the project as researchers too. But we had some technical staff and another researcher that's leaving the university. So it was a 3-year project. I joined for the second 2 years, so I missed the very initial phases, but I learned a lot about everything that was going on. So hopefully I can answer questions, and all your questions, and if not, I can direct you or get those questions answered. So let's move on. So if I first of all look at the outline of the project as a whole, it was a Horizon 2020 funded project, which is the EU strand of research funding, and it has 18 partner institutions, so 7 universities were involved in piloting, and there are other universities involved in ethics and quality assurance. There were technical organisations providing the technical solutions that we needed, and an education delivery partner who helped bring it all together, and who I believe probably created these 2 images. They're rather trite in a way, but they do tend to highlight the main aims of the project, which is to provide something that will both support students and the teaching staff in helping build trust in online assessments. The person that was, or the entity that was missing from those 2 images was really the institution, and so I think this might fill that. And it was suggesting that the TeSLA is a solution that can provide an institutional or fill an institutional gap to help resolve the need for e-authentication. So that's just in a nutshell what we were aiming at. And the project timeline, this is quite a lot of detail on here, but if you see over the 3 years of the project, the top blue bar shows that the technology was going through an iterative development through the project. So we had tools that were used that I'll tell you more about in a minute, and these were all brought together within a suite that was being designed as a plug-in into a university VLEs, and so all of that was being developed, and I think it is still being refined at the minute, and probably that will be ongoing as well. But then further down we have the pilots, and you can see there's 3 pilots. The third one in green there was actually divided into 2, and the first pilot eventually just an initial practice to get everyone used to beginning to use the tools, to talking to students about the tools, and getting staff involved in using those, and getting the technological team up and running to support those. And then the second pilot was using the tools with students studying on modules, And the third pilot was intended to actually build the tools as far as possible into real situations in teaching, so into real courses that were being taught. And that was the biggest pilot and we were aiming at getting very large numbers of students, and you'll see more about that in a second. So there's a slight gaps as I click next slide, and it takes a few seconds to come up. So perhaps we'll treat those as natural pauses. So I'll look, whilst that's changing, I'll look to see if there's any questions that people want to ask. Do feel free to ask questions as we go, rather than saving them up. So I thought, well, perhaps what we're finding is that, I mean, we've just had a couple of days of research talks at our institution at the OU, and it's clear from those that we're developing within our own system, with our own VLE, which is Moodle based, lots and lots of very exciting ways of carrying out assessment, and I was surprised at just how much we're doing. But all this essentially is to do with formative assessment, very low stakes, so there's no credit attached to it, and students aren't shamed for getting things wrong, and they can often have multiple goes to get things right, and they get good feedback. So thank you, Jeff, for saying how large the project was. We didn't see much of that at our institution, but yes, it was a very big project. And so and I'm sure other institutions are doing the same, that they're developing all sorts of very exciting online assessment. And I think the problem comes when we start to want to attach credit to the assessment, that we find that the parts of the organisations that are responsible for that find that they're reluctant to just go out and open things up as widely as we would like, because fundamentally because they want to be sure that the students' work is their own. And so I think I perceive this work as a way of opening up opportunities for assessment, and that if we could be more certain that students' work really was their own, then we could do more in terms of credit-bearing assessment and make it more relevant to students, give students different opportunities for doing different kinds of assessment that would allow more students to do to fulfill that potential, really, rather than exams. So at the moment, we can do some online assessment in our institution. We tend to stick to students typing things, and sometimes there are examples of more exciting things, but we generally stick to things like Word documents that are submitted using a bespoke ETMA system, an assignment system that's electronic, and it's all very carefully managed, and that's to try and build the quality assurance that we can trust and actually ensure academic integrity. So I'll click. So the suite of tools themselves, there's an EU website, the project website, which actually went down for a couple of days for the first time over the weekend, unfortunately, which put me in a panic. But it's back up and running as of yesterday evening, so I don't know what the issue was. But if you look at the link at the bottom of that slide, that's our project website. And so I've taken some of the images from that. And these 4 images relate to the, well, actually 5 main tools. So we've got face recognition, voice recognition, plagiarism, and there's an authorship validation, which we've also called forensic analysis because of the way in which it explores the patterns of text that students use. So there are 2 really in that window, and there's keystroke patterns. So I noticed Peter's asked whose biometrics we used. The student build. I'll say more about that, I think, as we go. Matthew, saying you can't hear things. I'll
One
leave
of the
that.
audience members seems to. I'll deal with it during the chat. Just keep going.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry. So that there's those tools, and below those, I've used the names we tended to use during the project. For the face recognition and voice recognition, there are also versions of those are anti-spoofing, which are to try and stop people using other people's data to validate their work. And so these tools were all developed by different groups, and they were brought together within the TeSLA suite. So if I click the next slide, and this was produced by the technical team to show how the Moodle incorporates within it. Sorry, the TeSLA incorporates within Moodle. So we initially have when it's built in, we have the learner goes to the cloud through their computer to link on to Moodle, their Moodle website with the VLE for their own course. And within that, there's TeSLA is an LTI plugin that then links to the TeSLA servers, which then communicate with the student. And initially, for some of those tools, so for face recognition, for voice recognition, for the keystroke analysis, and for the forensic analysis, we need to, we've called it enrollment within the project, is really essentially pre-populating those tools with the student's own data. And that's as a base set of data for subsequent checks to be made. So we obviously need to make sure that that data is accurate and authentic, and then we've got something that we can compare to. So the next slide shows that once they've enrolled, and they obviously need to give permission for this, they need to give us permission to use their data, and it obviously needs to be done in a very transparent way. And so when it comes to particular assessments within their course, these tools can be activated as and when needed, and in any combination needed. So we could have facial recognition and voice recognition and keystroke dynamics all working together for a particular assessment, but that's flagged to the student and their permission is requested to allow those tools to run. And then they run, and then they check against the data that's already stored during enrollment. And then the teacher view, they connect to the TeSLA servers through the plugin, and they then get to see some. This is a kind of a summary of everything that they will see for a particular group of students, and it will show where there might be issues. It obviously relies ultimately on humans to decide what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, but each of these tools will tend to highlight the likelihood that there's an issue that needs to be followed up, and it will be up to each institution to set how they set the limit for action, for following up on anything. And so I haven't included it as a slide here, but you can click on any one of those and get a more detailed analysis of what's going on. So I think it's disappeared, I think, off my screen, but someone's asked, oh, Peter, yeah, sorry, how the enrollment process works. And so that's done through the Moodle website again. And it generally asks students to record, if it's voice recognition, it will ask you to record several pieces of your speech, and in different times of the day, because your voice can sound different at different times, perhaps in different environments. So we've got different background sounds that need to be filtered out, and then that's recorded. And obviously that needs to be done again fully transparently, so the student knows exactly what's happening to their data, how it's been stored, and exactly what's being used. And it's similar for the others. And so if I click next again, so within the suite of tools, or employing those, there's a number of roles. So there's the admin, which is the TeSLA. I think someone's turned their mic on, which might cause interference for others. So if you can just check. So there's these roles anyway. So there's the TeSLA administration, there's an institutional administration, obviously the learner, the instructor, and then there's other institutional roles to do with ethics and the legal side, managing the results, and obviously supporting SEND students. So I'll click next. So if I go on now to look at the pilots and what we did there, that there were the 7 institutions, as I said, that were involved in the piloting over the 3 years. I've grouped them like this to show which are online institutions, which were the main target institution for the tools originally. And so there's University of Catalonia, the Open University of Catalonia, us, the Open University in the UK, and the Open University in the Netherlands. And there were 2 face-to-face institutions in Bulgaria and Sofia, and there were 2 blended universities that do some online and some face-to-face tuition, and that was the University of Askila in Norway and Anadolu in Turkey. And they provided lots of data, and Jyväskylä looked particularly at a study looking at SEND students as well. So what we did find, if I just dwell on that last slide for a second, was that somewhat to my surprise, but perhaps not to others, was that the face-to-face institutions also found that TeSLA was very useful because you could bring perhaps there were options of bringing students into a particular room and getting them to do an assessment altogether and being able to authenticate their work as they were working, or to allow them to go away and do assessments in their own rooms, in their own homes, and do assessment that way to supplement what they're doing elsewhere. So I think there was wider interest than I expected, and I understand that that's ongoing. So the ultimate aim of all processes, ways of engaging, is that on the left-hand side of this slide, we've got the kind of design cycle where if you're designing new curriculum, and we do this regularly, but it's over every 8 years usually when we design a new module or we change a module, we review it partway through, but within that, and obviously other people work much smaller time scale where you might be changing things much more year by year, you'd as part of that design, if it's just you designing the module, then you might not be explicit in the same way about this, but you think about the assessments and how you'd use the instruments, where you'd want to invoke those or ask students to allow them to be invoked. Then once that design is done, then you have to think about the students and ensuring that they see the agreement and they can accept the agreement, that they understand that this is an alternative experience and that there are other experiences if they don't want to do this, but there's potential in this. Then the students enroll, as we've said, and then they go on to their learning, and so the last 3 of those are to do with them studying and the submission of activities and the managing of the results and whatever actions follow on from that. And so the experience for most students will be them enrolling and them invoking those tools on occasion through their work, and maybe being involved in reporting, so that I think again the institution would decide perhaps on a subject by subject basis just how it reports to students the outcomes of these tools. And so if I click on, yeah, so Ruth, whilst that was going, I just read yours about requiring alternatives. Yes, we do, and I think it's something we need to be very aware of. And I think within our own institution, we since 2005 we've had a requirement for computing and for online, for internet access, and we still find students now who want to study without either of those, and that's becoming more and more problematic. But I think there are ways of managing it, although it's becoming harder. And so we do have print options still, and obviously students with particular needs, we deal with those. There's some groups that we can just provide solutions for on mass, and there's others which will need personal solutions. Okay, so I've looking at comments. You've quickly added up the students. Well done. So I think I might answer some of those questions in our ultimate slides, and I have got the answers to those. I might have left those out though to avoid going over the hour. So there are a lot of assessments, and I mean, within our institution, if I say a bit more about our own circumstance, we found that because it was a trial, a pilot study, we weren't able to, and because our VLE is so big, and we weren't allowed to carry out pilots within our main VLE, bring the plugin into that. So what we had to do was create a parallel VLE on different servers using Moodle, using the same interface that students would be used to. And because the numbers of students were so large, I mean, there's nearly 30,000, well, over 20,000 altogether. To get the numbers that our institution had to contribute to that, we had to essentially invite every single student that was available, and it meant that we invited over 30,000 students essentially to take part. Because they're distance learning, because they're completely free to choose whether they want to or not, and because they're busy people, we have quite a low return on a lot of these kind of requests. So to try and maximize that return, we mailed students reminders that we'd invited them, and we did this 3 times. We didn't want to overplay that, because we didn't want students to get fed up with us emailing them, but we just didn't want them to miss the opportunity to take part if they felt vaguely inclined to do so. So we did that as politely as we could, and for those that didn't take part, the very last mail was to ask them if they wanted to, of course, to give a reason for why they didn't want to take part. So we gained some understanding of that. And so I think only 50 replied to that, and they just didn't want to engage with the technology at the time, essentially. So so going back to Jeff's question, in the way in which we had to set up our courses within the test site, we were obviously directing students from a lot of different kinds of subjects, from a lot of different modules, from all the levels within the university to those. So the closest we could get to building those into real life courses was by providing generic questions that all students would have a chance to answer. So we weren't testing their subject knowledge, we were just testing some generic knowledge about the institution. And I mean, that didn't make the use of the tools any less valid, but it obviously meant that we weren't able to trial in exactly the kind of subjects that they were using, but others did. So the Open University in Catalonia did I think they were running into very large numbers of actual assessments that they were using, and they were built into their real courses, and other universities manage this as well. So if I just slide on to the next one. So this is the subjects that were covered. So there's a range of subjects. If you look at all the green bars, those should add up to 100%, and all the blue bars should add up to 100%, and so on for the yellow. And it just shows the spread between the pilots and between the subjects. So some were not as strongly represented as others. And for example, maths perhaps is one of the harder ones to incorporate it in, but this is something that they were willing to try. And we found that some students, some of the math subjects don't always require math answers, and so there are other things that we could test within those. And so I think it's not necessarily, as it stands, useful for all subjects in all circumstances, but for most subjects in many circumstances it will be. So I'll click the next slide. So the language of the course, again, we didn't just have English, and we see there that Bulgarian was a key language within the study, but there are a range of others as well. I won't dwell on that, I'll move on. The gender distribution, when I first looked at this, I thought it was male-female, but it's not. It's the percentages of female students within pilots 3A and 3B for the final two halves of that last pilot. So it shows that there was a fairly even balance mostly, but with some universities having a stronger female base than male, and one or two with lower. But overall it was 50-50 essentially if you look at the last pair of bars. Matthew, thanks for that. That's using weighted candidates, that's good. And I think doing maths formulas was one of the things that I know our universities is developing, and I saw examples yesterday that were really impressive of being able to put maths formulas and solutions in. So the kinds of assessment, I won't dwell on this too much, but there was we tried to break down whether the assessment was formative or summative, and both were used. So we see that some summative assessment was definitely covered within the pilots. It wasn't all formative, which was good. Was it supervised? It was largely unsupervised. Collaborative, mostly individual as you'd expect, but with some collaborative work. And I think that was mainly at Uvascular for the SEND students, but I haven't picked that further. The type of response, so the creation of answers or projects, not just selecting, not just multiple choice, and so it does support students creating text and artifacts of voice and video perhaps as well. So going back, you could use facial recognition for multiple choice if you want to make sure it's that person sitting there at the keyboard doing it, and last the balance between the kind of response. So again, mainly text responses there, but there were some others, and I see this as opening up opportunities for other kinds of artifacts, using particularly audio and video. If I just catch up with the questions for a second, I'll click the next slide whilst I do that. Okay, I don't think I think the point's well made about business sense and business cases and understanding what institutions' role is what I think that's about. So this just summarises the range of disabilities that were declared by students for the SEND study, and it was a whole range, and we'll see it later. But what we found is that some of those students felt really quite well supported by the suite of tools, because it freed them up from having to travel perhaps. It allowed them to take part in things that otherwise they wouldn't. But then there were other students that found it was quite inaccessible. So accessibility is an issue and will be an ongoing issue for anything I think we provide online, but obviously particularly for assessment. So that's really summarised in this slide. So SEND students are extremely vulnerable, that developers need to continue to develop the tools and to bear these students in mind, and that we need alternative options, and we've commented on that before. If I click next and just catch up with the reading. Okay, so we're moving on to findings now. think Matthew's point about language packs, I don't know enough about that. We, as I said before, we obviously used TeSLA in multiple languages, and it seemed to work well in those. I think so. I'm sure that must be supported quite well. But that's something to explore if you want to, and I'll come on to more details later. So, of the students that took part, most were positive about their experience. I think obviously being pilots, there were some technical issues. We found that there was quite a difference between the institutions, so that for us, for example, students could join the pilot and do the pilot in their own time, and it could be at midnight, it could be in the first thing in the morning before anyone else is up, it could be over lunchtime, or it could be any time. And it was impossible for us with a really small team to provide real-time support for those students. And because we had no control over the kind of computing interface that they were using, there were a range of technical issues that they encountered that we couldn't just deal with on the spot. We did provide an email address, and we responded to that as soon as we were in the next day, but obviously for some that was too late. But for other institutions, the face-to-face institutions, where you had quite a large number of people in a room at any one time, you could get some technical support in and arrange to support that. And so those technical issues perhaps were less dominant for that kind of institution. And I'm not saying it was really dominant for us, but it was certainly a factor in why students perhaps didn't complete their study, and why perhaps when they tried to sign up, they didn't take it any further. Oh, sorry, it did say that if I just go back to that for a second, it did say students did generally feel that having methods like this built in would improve trust in their assessments, would help them trust in the university's assessments. Obviously, if they know that they're not cheating, they want to be fairly sure that no one else is cheating as well. And I mean, some of our students said, well, because they're mainly mature students, said, well, why would I want to cheat anyway? I'm doing this because I want to. But obviously some students still do, and there's different cultures in different countries, and that have different views on different, well, on plagiarism, for example. And so there are issues around all that as well. But they did think it would make it more difficult to cheat. So staff, I suppose they're not directly using these tools, so we perhaps expect higher levels of satisfaction, but they'd obviously see the implications of using these tools as well in ways that perhaps in a perspective that students wouldn't necessarily have. But so they felt that on the whole this was a positive step, and that there were obviously still scope for improvement within the tools, but it did make things possible that hadn't been possible. You just have to get the institutions to allow that now. So moving on. Jeff, yes, surprised to hear that email was used. So I think as an institution, we still rely very much on email with each other, and so was a natural thing for us. That might have been our shortcoming rather than anyone else's. Students need an email address for their accounts, and so we know that all students have email address, so that they can email us, so that's possible. We don't know that all students use other tools or would want to use other tools, and we wouldn't want to necessarily introduce other technologies into the mix. So I think that is probably why we wouldn't do that for such a large scale study. For smaller scales, if then maybe we would, within a particular module or within a particular group, it might be a good idea to perhaps discuss and see what would be the best tool to use. But for us, I think that email was the best solution, and not just the easiest one for us. We within the VLE, we have our own systems for communicating with students. So the invitations were all sent out through those systems. So it was all officially recorded, and we have to obviously make sure that we check with the institution which students we can and can't invite into the study. So hopefully that's answered that question, Jeff. This slide just gives some of the other findings we had when we looked at the data more closely. So we were looking for ways of framing the tools, the suite of tools, and the implementation. And other people have used the technology acceptance model, which seemed to be a very good way of approaching this. And that looks at the accessibility, the availability, or the accessibility of use of a tool, how easy it is to use, and the benefit that people gain from it. And I think it was originally produced for the banking industry, to as they brought in new technologies, but it seemed to apply here as well. But what we felt it missed was something to do more with risk and trust. I mean, the trust is implied really, because if you're a bank and in bringing something new, then you assume that on the whole, your customers trust you, and at least with your money. And so for us, though, we felt that a lot of students were, and this is even from the students, that were self-selected and were, I suppose, predisposed to wanting to have a go at this and willing to experiment with it. There are still issues of trust that they flag, and that's not because they don't trust us as an organisation, because they do, and it's not because they I think you're right, Ruth, about low levels of trust, but I think there's different aspects to that as well. But so I think we found that if we looked at the questions that we had in our questionnaires that focused on trust, and we obviously had questionnaires before and after, we found that whilst the students that did both of them were positive about using TeSLA, both before and after, I think we found that in ours there was a slight shift in some of those questions being less positive. And I mean, that some of the technical issues to do with that might be brought in, or it might be just to do with the engaging with these tools. It made them think, well, maybe I'm not as comfortable as I thought I was with this, and so I think that showed us was that we cannot take that trust for granted, and that's even with a group like this. So we need to be very careful if we want to introduce any kind of tools like this, however optional, that we do it in a way that is completely transparent, that completely shows students how things are being used and what the benefits are. And so that's something that I'd like to take further as well, and look at all the partner institutions to see how those changes worked. So what else we found was that something to do with the embeddedness and the immediacy of the tool, because it's completely there within their VLE and it's accessible. It can just be invoked as and when it's needed, and students don't go somewhere else. Their data is not sent off somewhere else, and that seems to have benefits in terms of aligning and getting everything between the teaching and assessment and learning outcomes to fit together and to work together. And there's a BJET paper that we had accepted, and that included some cluster analysis findings, which we summarized there. And it showed, again, within the group of students, that there was positive feelings about using TeSLA or suites of the authentication tools like this, and that women on the whole tended to be slightly more positive, and that kind of fitted with the changes we saw in the levels of trust in the first item there as well. But they are concerned about data privacy and security, and people are ever more concerned about that, quite rightly. And I think what I haven't said there so far is that we do find that students were less willing or less prepared to share facial recognition and voice recognition data than they were with their written text for anti-plagiarism. And that is partly, we presume, because they're used to anti-plagiarism tools already, but it's also because that's a less personal set of data. And whereas they're obviously their face and their voice is very much more personal, and perhaps they link it with surveillance as well. And so I think there's issues there which need to be considered for anyone wanting to use anything like this. So I noticed that the name TeSLA, I don't know. I joined the project a year in and that had already been established. So I did notice in one station after a meeting when I was going home, there was a big notice on one of the boards about TeSLA stock rising, which I thought was quite funny, but it obviously wasn't ours. And so, yes, I would have thought there would have been issues. So Peter asked, what are we asking them to trust you for? Okay, so I think the trust is to do, well, there's different, I introduced the idea of different levels of trust, and so, and that was in this as well. So when we were thinking about not taking trust for granted, we've got different levels of trust. The students trust the institution and they might trust their teaching team and all the rest of it, but there might be other layers that they're not comfortable with. But what we're actually asking them to trust us for is obviously to manage their data and to use it wisely and very carefully and ethically. There's the trust in the title as well is also to do with building trust in online assessment and getting employers to be able to trust more, getting students to be able to trust more, and so on. It took me a while to get my head around that, because I thought if we're collecting data and we're measuring things and we're comparing things, that's not necessarily showing levels of trust, but it's in order to build trust in the overall system. So Liam asked a question about really trying to pretend we were someone else, and I think we did a very small amount of that, largely with staff doing things. Other institutions did more than that, and so the technical teams did that in trialing their system. So I think that was done. But I can't speak greatly about that, other than to say the reports I've seen say that the tools are reliable in identifying the correct person. Has it been maintained and funded? Okay, so and sold. So let's move on. Oh, sorry, that they're just publications made from our team, and they're all on our ORO website, our Open Research Online website. But there's also, and I've clicked the next slide here, and I will again. On this slide, if you go to the project page, the TeSLA project page, and you'll find a whole list of publications there. Last time I looked, it wasn't completely up to date, but there is a lot there. It is being maintained and it is being developed for commercial use. I know we as an institution have access to it for another 2 years just as part of the project, and we're just working out how we can make use of that, partly because our technical team is dispersed, and we're struggling to find out how we can take that forward, and we'd like to. But they're always the aim, I think, was to just funds to use this funding, European funding, to trial and test something, to build something that would be available for people to use. And I don't know what level of payments or anything, but if it will be, and it maybe is already, I'd ask, but I haven't quite got answers back from everyone yet. But what we can do is, if you want further information, if you email Anna, that email address, you can, she's our main conduit for that kind of information, and so she'll be able to take things further for you. If you want to look at it and try it and test it out, then go to her. You'll find that it's Anna with one N there, but she tends to sign herself Anna with two N's, so don't be put off by that. It's to do with Catalan and Castilian and families and the way in which people use their names, so that's fine. Can we use it after Brexit? Oh, thanks, Peter, for that. My personal hope is that since Brexit is a Conservative project, I'd like that just to disappear, and hopefully it will over the next few months, but will, having cost the country huge amounts already. But yes, after Brexit, however, whatever happens to that, then I'm sure you will be able to use it, because it won't be hosted with us anyway. So are the Moodle plugins on GitHub or similar? I think they are on GitHub. I've seen links to GitHub around, but again, if you follow up with Anna, she'll link you on. With the trust line, I personally think it's, why aren't you trusting me in the first place, not trust me as learner. I think you're quite right. That is probably very true. And again, I trust very few people with my data, and so Jeff, you asked about the 8 university partners still using TeSLA. I've said what we're doing is that we're trying to, but we're struggling with the technical team at the minute. I dropped a line to the other institutions, but at the moment I didn't get a rush of replies. So I think what tends to happen is you appreciate that research project teams come together to do the particular work, and then they've got to go on and do the next project. For taking it forward, you need different teams, and I imagine there's discussions going on in each university, and like there is in ours. And so this might be something that takes a while for people to pick up on, but I think people are using these kind of things, but if they're doing exam proctoring, and so, but that is very resource intensive and obviously linked with very high stakes assessment. It's just extending the exam room concept really, whereas I see things like TeSLA as providing something right from the absolute low end where there's zero risk or zero stakes to right up to potentially high stakes, and that there's a spectrum there that something like this can contribute to, but it will take universities a while to work out exactly how to do it. Issues with Turnitin, I've not seen any issues with Turnitin. We use Turnitin, and we use an in-house thing we call Copycatch, and other people use Akund, and they've used TeSLA with as well, and that's fine. There's not. I think the TeSLA system runs as a plugin. It will submit students' work to that for whatever comparisons it does. Universities can then submit it as well to Akund or Turnitin or whoever. So I was going to ask, it hasn't come out in the discussion, but is anyone else using any tools or trying to build these kind of tools into it? I'm not necessarily TeSLA, but anything into their own institution or into their own teaching? Thanks, Peter. It'll be good to talk to you more about that. And obviously, Matthew, I know we've had a bit of a chat about this. Laura, you've spoken about whether it's the way in which we assess. I think assessment is a constant challenge, and yet you're right. I think within an institution, there's people trying to challenge the way in which assessment takes place, what we're assessing, why we're assessing, and I think there's probably I think that's going to go on, and you're quite right that we need, it would be good to in a sense start again, but we're where we are, and we're trying to take things forward, and it would be great and to be able to start again. And that might be I don't know if you're involved in something that can do that. There are courses that do that, aren't there? There are courses where students come, they might be particularly at master's level, where students come together and they'll develop the curriculum themselves anyway, and they'll decide what they're doing, and they'll decide how they assess it. And so that does take place. But I think for us, we're talking about tens of thousands of students over hundreds of modules, and making big changes like that, we have to make incremental changes, I think, for what I'm saying for us. And Peter, I like that. I've decided to look for full keystroke recognition. Thank you. So I think that's an argument for not just using one tool on its own. People will do that, and you're quite right to test that out. Thank you. Okay. Jeff, very good question. So I can't pick up on everything here. Things I can easily pick up with Jeff about how much TeSLA was developed as a new and existing. Let me see. I think on the whole, they're tools that existed. I think there was some extra development of some of the tools to make them work in the context. It's that the suite and the plugins and the way in which they all interact together is entirely new. Tim, thank you for finding those. I'll look those up now, actually, and see how they are. But I know we're running up against time, so I think I gave my email at the beginning of the slide, so feel free to email me. I'll look through and have a read of those comments as well separately. And oh, thank you, Matthew, for moving that on. And again, if you email Anna and to try and find out things, hopefully you'll get a good response. She's been very quick at responding to me recently. But if not, then do contact me again, and I'll see how I can help. So if I just stop talking there and just see if anyone else wants to make any final contributions.
If you want to speak using your microphone, ask a question or make a comment, you're welcome to do that. Just stick up your virtual hand and we'll let you talk. Hi, Peter, go for it. Peter, you'll need to turn on your microphone icon in the bottom center of the screen.
Thank you. Yes. Yep. Thank you, sir. Now I'm standing up as well. Thank you, Chris. Good presentation. Very broad question. How broad is the problem that you're trying to solve with this tool? What's the background level of cheating that you're trying to address?
Okay, I think for us as an institution, and I alluded to this, I think during the session, that I think it is very low for us. It's not non-existent. I think what I see, because I manage a module in our master's program, in terms of plagiarism, I see some examples of inadvertent plagiarism due to poor practice rather than anything deliberate. But I know that there is contract cheating. I hear others talking, particularly in the undergraduate curriculum, of some pockets of contract cheating, perhaps in some subjects, in some groups of students. And so I don't know how extensive that is, but I think it's perceived as being an issue more than perhaps it is. But I don't know how others find it. Is it an €8 million problem? Well, you thought it was, and so, or were persuaded to think it was. You're quite right, is it? I think everyone has to make their own judgment on that.
People might know of Tracy Breitag's work in Australia. She's been recently publishing into the journals as well. There's currently a Texas series of workshops on cheating, and contract cheating is a big part of it. I believe her work came out with a sort of she did a really big survey across about 8 different universities in Australia. And I think the background sort of problem is about 6%. In terms of the 6% roughly of cheating, or those percentage of students who admitted to it in an anonymous survey. So, I mean, my feeling is, is in line with Chris. I think there's a significant minority, but it's not an overwhelming problem, and there's pockets of it in certain places or another. We had an issue with an online course in this university where there was online quizzes, and I suppose perhaps it was asking for trouble. Online quizzes in an online course, that there was no invigilation or anything, and apparently they sort of found a much higher percentage of contract cheating in that instance. But yeah, I think it varies, and there's pockets of it.
Thanks, Tim, for posting that. Shoplifting 4%. Yeah, it could well be. Could well be something about the human condition. Matthew, I'm aware it's 8 o'clock. I'll let you decide when to round off if you want, or we can carry on.
Sure. I mean, I think we will have to wrap it up in a minute or two. I'm sure you have to go off and get the family off to wherever they need to get off to. Richard Lander at Clark, yes, you're right. It was Tracy Breitag. Do Google her name. Tracy Breitag was from University of South Australia, UniSA. So if you type in Breitag UniSA contract cheating, you'll probably find a lot of her stuff. And there's also a national workshop series for those people in Australia going on at the moment on this very subject. But it's kind of like an invite-only thing. Yes, Phil Dawson as well was doing down at Deakin, was doing quite a lot of work around this, and the fact that how you would go about getting tutors and markers and things to detect contract cheating. He's published a couple of papers on that as well. Okay, folks, I'm sorry to say we are going to have to cut it off. I'm sure Chris will be happy to receive emails for any more questions and things. Given there's people that need to leave. So thank you very much for coming. I think this is probably our last session for the year, but hopefully we will be able to send the link of the recording around, so you may wish to engage with that again. Otherwise, we'll hopefully see you in the new year. So thank you all. Our recording will be stopped in a second.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Excellent job.
Cheers.